Have you ever wondered whether one man could basically single-handedly destroy an entire platform? I know what you're thinking. Luke, we've seen this recently. Jim Ryan with PlayStation. But PlayStation's actually doing pretty okay. They just wasted billions of dollars on Bungie and other games that are going nowhere like Concord and Fair Games. But prior to that, there was another individual, a legend, who took over Xbox when they were at their peak. And all he had to do was continue doing what they had already been doing. And Xbox, without a doubt, if they had kept that trajectory, would be the kings of gaming right now. PlayStation, who's that? It's Xbox and Nintendo. PlayStation's nobody. But the decisions of one guy, because they were so convoluted, so misguided, led to Xbox falling so far behind. It has been over a decade and they still have not recovered, even after spending billions and billions of dollars. And that has to do with a guy by the name of Don Mattrick. Now, this video was put together by Onwards and Upwards, and it's a great little breakdown of this guy's background. It's a great little breakdown of what happened, and I wanted to share it with you guys here today. Make sure to go over and sub to Onwards and Upwards, just like that. See how easy it is. Give the video a like and show him some love. Let's see just what Don did to our beloved 360 era Xbox.
It may seem a bit harsh to blame all of Xbox's failures on one man a full decade after he left Xbox.
Doesn't he just look like the kind of guy that would destroy an entire platform for gamers? Doesn't he just have that vibe? I think he does. Bear in mind, this guy now is like the CEO of, I want to say Zynga or something. It's a big mobile game company. He destroyed Xbox and then moved on and now is like CEO of some other big company. Can somebody check that real quick? Do a Google search on him. I'm pretty sure that's what he's doing now.
When you look at Xbox's current state and the fact that their boss has said they're in third place, Don Mattrick's unfortunate influence and terrible decisions can still be felt even a decade after he left Xbox, largely due to mistakes that were made towards the back end of the Xbox 360 era and the abysmal unveiling of the follow-up console, the Xbox One. The brand has been chasing after Sony ever since, and even now, Xbox is still struggling.
Oh, dude, the Kinect videos are so hard to watch. They're so hard to watch. They really thought that was the future of gaming, dude. DeAndre says, yup, it's Zynga. Dude, I'm so good. Yeah, he left Xbox, became CEO of Zynga. I think since then he's left or retired or something because he's like 70. But yeah, he was like the head of Zynga for a while, which is crazy. It's why, like, it's the biggest problem in corporate America besides like the overwhelming greed and all of that. You know what? There's a lot of issues. But one of the issues with corporate America is that it seems like there are so many executives who will destroy a company and blow it up. And then they're like, wow, that sucks. Everybody loses their jobs. Anyway, I'm going to go get promoted and work as CEO of this other company. It's just like, wait, what happened? And apparently it's because most of these guys are just like buddies. It's better to have your friend work as the CEO of the company you're on the board of directors for than to have a total nobody. Because if your friend and if your buddy, your golf buddy is the CEO of the company, you have an in. So you can help direct the company more clearly. So it creates this weird like aristocracy of executives that all know each other. They all play golf together. And I met some of these people back when I worked in real estate. There were some people we worked with that were freakishly wealthy and were former executives of like Microsoft and other huge companies. And they all would regularly go golfing together. They'd go on fishing trips, or when they were in town, they would just go get dinner at some fancy restaurant in Denver together. And they were always checking in with each other constantly. And you'd be amazed how often it was like, yeah, I'll serve on the board of directors for this company. And then, yeah, you bring me over and I'll work there and we'll bring you over here. And it's just very incestuous, you know, it's very, very incestuous. So it's unfortunately a common occurrence with this because you would think if you blow a company to smithereens and basically screw it over for a decade plus that then you could never get another job. But no, apparently like there's such a thing as failing upward, which is unfortunately very common.
It doesn't help that Don Mattrick followed Xbox's best boss. Peter Moore led Xbox from 2003 until he left for EA Sports in 2007. One thing Peter Moore got right was the 360's first and third-party lineup, as even Grand Theft Auto 4 launched on the Xbox on the same day as PlayStation, plus new franchises like Mass Effect and BioShock that launched exclusively on the Xbox 360. I always thought that Moore was an unpopular figure given his time at EA.
But now let's part with that old EA Sports saying, get the f*** out of my building.
But fans look back on his tenure fondly. His goal for Xbox was to take the fight to PlayStation, and he understood quite clearly that great exclusives sell consoles.
Yeah, just look at this chart. Look at this. 2007. Bear in mind, this is like at E3. This is what E3 used to be. It was like a business conference, technically speaking. But later, of course, it became more of like announcing stuff for fans and customers and stuff. But back in the day, they would do stuff like this. It was like a presentation, like of PowerPoint slides and stuff. But here you can see they're showing installed base, 2007. 5.6 million Xbox 360s. The Wii is at 2.8 million. It had only been out for about a year. Same with these, I guess. And the PS3 at 1.4 million. That is a bigger gap than we've seen proportionally with the PS5 and the Xbox Series consoles. That's crazy.
Now let's take a look at the Xbox 360 momentum since the other two consoles launched, and outselling PlayStation 3 by nearly 2-1.
But this also includes launching a console with the Red Ring of Death, which led to a very generous returns policy.
Which, by the way, if you are if you're post Red Ring of Death, dude, that's like a whole era. For a lot of people, the Red Ring of Death is like a core childhood memory. Represent yourself in chat. If you had a console, if you had an Xbox that red ringed. Sounds weird to say red ringed, red rings, red rum, you know. But I had this. My uncle's Xbox had a Red Ring of Death console. It was like a shockingly common thing. Like, look at chat right now. This is madness. Let me just pull this up. Dude, 3 of them. Ben Brody says he had 3 of them brick. Like 2 of them I got Red Ring 2 times. 3 Xbox that caught the Red Ring of Death. After that, I switched to PS3 because I was fed up. 2 over here, 2. Like, imagine if there were a console that launched today where this many people were like, oh yeah, my PS5 bricked itself. Yeah, twice. Like, good God almighty. Maybe that's why their install base was so high, because all the consoles kept breaking, so they just would send you a new one and count it as 2. I don't know. Maybe that's how they did it. But yeah, the Red Ring of Death is another level. It's why it's always so funny to me when people are like, consoles are getting worse and they're getting less powerful and quality control is out the window. I'm like, guys, like the biggest console in the world in the late 2000s so frequently like committed seppuku on itself that it got a little nickname. And now it's viewed as like, people get tattoos of this because it's so recognizable. It's crazy that was, I don't think it was tolerated, but it's not viewed as like, oh yeah, at least we're not back then anymore. But like, we've come a long way that this is now like unfathomable that they would do this.
Even with this huge defect, the Xbox 360 was still worth it at the time. Xbox came out swinging in this generation. They launched a full year before their rivals. On top of having great first and third party games, it had the best online console experience, it pioneered digital distribution for consoles, achievements, and helped to popularize indie games with promotions like Xbox Live Arcade Wednesdays and later the Summer of Arcade. Peter Moore would be a hard act to follow. Don Mattrick had worked in the industry
so they gave up and didn't even try. Okay, Don Mattrick.
Since the 1980s, which included a 15-year stint as president at EA before taking the job at Xbox. When he joined Xbox in 2007, the Xbox 360 was riding high and outselling the PlayStation 3, but by this point it was still playing second fiddle to the Nintendo Wii. Xbox and Sony jumped on the motion control bandwagon and both would debut their own devices in 2009. It would seem that Don Mattrick would be blinded by the success of the Wii. It didn't matter that the motion controls were terrible, especially if you tried to make a gameplay mechanic that was even a little bit more complicated than swinging a golf club. Xbox had already made a move at the casual crowd and ripped off Nintendo's Mii's with avatars in 2008. Now you could earn rewards in games to dress your avatar as if it was your own sim. It should come as no surprise that while at EA, Don Mattrick was involved with a series like The Sims. I can't count how many avatars I saw wearing the helmets from Halo ODST. Avatars were also used in some indie games, in game shows, as well as Kinect games.
So many Kinect games. I think a lot of companies have grown from this now, but maybe they haven't, because they sort of followed in line with the the Switch, just in the sense that they made handhelds like the Portal, and then Xbox is rumored to be making a handheld as well, but granted it'll be like 7-8 years after the Switch by the time they get around to it, so it's more like a Steam Deck competitor. But anyways, like back in that era, so many of these companies were so desperate to come up with what the next big thing was, and they didn't want to be left behind, that the second they saw anything that had even a little bit of potential to maybe start a new trend, they would just jump on it. It's similar to what happened with like NFTs, where every company was trying to go balls to the walls with NFTs before they collapsed. And in this case, it was motion controls. Like every company thought motion controls were the future, even though they never stopped asking themselves, like, does it actually make gaming better? And the answer is not really, yeah, it's kind of no. It actually can make games worse. Like when I get home from a long day at work, you know, if you work retail, you're on your feet all day, the last thing you want to do is stand in your living room and be like, okay, time to play Madden. Oh, I've got to throw the ball. Like nobody wants to do that. Like it sounds miserable, but all these companies tried to go and throw all of their money into that trend because they thought maybe that could become the next big thing, and it just wasn't. And I think that that's the tale of a lot of Don Mattrick stuff, is that he didn't have a vision for Xbox other than just trying to follow and copy what other big companies were doing and finding some success with. So he's like, how do we kick off, you know, the next generation? Well, what if we lean into the Kinect stuff and we bundle it with all that? Okay, that sounds great. And then we're big into digital distribution stuff. Okay, so no used games at all. Let's not do that at all. And then how else do we do this? Well, people really like interactive entertainment mixed with gaming. And what if we were the one-stop shop for digital content? So you don't need any other devices, because cable boxes were a thing back in 2012 when they were figuring this out. So they're like, okay, well, what if we had a cable box mixed with a game console? So you just needed the Xbox and nothing else. And they just totally lost sight of why people were buying Xboxes, which was to play good games. It sounds so simple, but they just totally forgot why people were buying them. You know, it's amazing. Eduardo, thank you for becoming a member, my friend. Thank you.
Speaking of Kinect, in 2009 it would make its debut at E3 under the name Project Atoll. Going one step further than the Wii, it was just a camera and no controller, as according to Don Mattrick, a standard controller is seen as a barrier to entry.
For far too many people, the controller is a barrier separating video game players from everyone else.
I would love to know where they got that idea. Video game controllers are a barrier. The only way I could possibly think that that makes sense is if they did a survey of people and they were like, if a game looks good to a casual, you know, person on the street, what could prevent you from getting into it? And somebody said, well, I just don't know like what the buttons are. You know, when you hand the controller to somebody who's never played on Xbox or PlayStation before, they only play on the other stuff, and the prompt comes up and it's like, press X. And then they have to look at the controller and then press it, you know, because they don't have the muscle memory. I could see that being a barrier, but people get used to it very, very quickly. And it's just frankly better than the alternative, which was this. I mean, they failed to ask themselves, is the Kinect a superior option to just spending 10 minutes and figuring out how to use the controller? Again, like they spent billions of dollars on a failed assumption that the Kinect was better than the alternative. It's just amazing.
Aside from this sounding like he's trying to create a divide between gamers and non-gamers, he seems to be forgetting that the Wii had a controller. There will be a bunch of demos for Kinect games showing happy 2.2 families in their gigantic living rooms, with most of these games being either party, dance, or sports games. I wonder why. Xbox still had a decent first-party lineup at this point, but the third-party offering would start to suffer, as a number of series like BioShock, Lost Planet, and Mass Effect would make their way over to PlayStation eventually. While under Peter Moore, Xbox's goal was to take down PlayStation, but under Don Mattrick, Kinect was now Xbox's focus, and Nintendo was the new enemy.
I think that's a really good and profound point. Xbox did really well when they competed with PlayStation, and they tried to focus on having better services offers and things like that in games than PlayStation. When they tried to go head to head against Nintendo, they just couldn't do it. And I think it's because they figured out what we know now, which is that Nintendo is just frankly different. It's weird Nintendo gets away with a lot of stuff no other company can get away with, you know, whether it's anti-consumer pricing models for their games, you know, being hyper controlled with media, making sure only certain select outlets get coverage of their games and consoles beforehand. And there's just so many things, you know, copyright strikes against YouTubers that don't join their program that takes most of the ad revenue from games. Like, people have asked me, well, Luke, why don't you make more videos on Nintendo games or like Tears of the Kingdom and stuff? And it's because Nintendo wants you to join different programs they have, depending on where you are and what kind of videos you're making. And those programs can take huge chunks of your ad revenue to the point where it's not even that profitable to make the video in the first place, because Nintendo will just take a cut of it. It's honestly kind of shocking, but they get away with it because they're Nintendo, you know, whatever. And what's amazing is we all know that they do that, and we still buy all their games because they're really good. Like, it's weird. We're all part of the problem together. We're all doing it together. Yeah, except Jamie. Jamie in chat says he doesn't. So Jamie's killing it. But like, Nintendo's just different. They have a huge mainstream appeal. They appeal to casual gamers in a way that Xbox and PlayStation just simply don't. And they do that by innovating and having really clever ideas. The one time they didn't really have any super clever idea was with the Wii U, and the console suffered as a result. But when they hit it out of the park with the Wii and with the Switch, the console becomes the best-selling console of all time, and it's amazingly successful, and it just prints tons of money. But Xbox and PlayStation can't operate that way. And frankly, they don't innovate in the same way, and they don't take the same like kinds of risks, basically. It's a risk to go and be like, yeah, our next console, after everybody was complaining that the Wii U was too weak compared to the consoles it was releasing next to, our solution is to launch the Switch, which is basically the same power level as the 2011 Wii U. And it's not really any more powerful, but it's portable and the controllers pop off. It makes kind of a sound. That's what we're doing. That's a risk to launch that after you got that feedback, but they did it, and it was amazingly successful. And I just don't think Xbox or PlayStation are the types to take that level of risk with it. Why did they bet on that? Or what are you talking? Hold on. It just seems so weird and illogical change of strategy. Why did they go from being online box with Halo, the online box with Halo, to trying to become some motion capture or motion control box? I think what it is, Kristad, is they assumed that Sony would not make any progress. They assumed gamers would stay on Xbox. So they thought they could do this thing where like they capture some gamers with Halo and with these online games and stuff, and then they kind of let go. And then they go over here and try to capture these people. And then they go over here and try to capture these people, the Wii fans. And, you know, over here we got the motion game fans. And over here we got this and that. And they just totally spaced that when you let go of this group you just captured to go and try to grab this over here, a lot of these are going to leak out and drift away. And then PlayStation will come and grab them and capture them. They just thought that they could get distracted for like 5-6 years doing this Wii U, or not Wii U, doing this Kinect stuff, and that people would just continue to buy Xboxes, when they didn't. People lost focus and started shifting over to PlayStation, who was starting to really invest heavily in their first party games.
Kinect's launch was hailed as a success, as it sold 8 million units in just 2 months. And the Xbox 360 did see an increase in sales. In late 2011, the 360 had its biggest sales week in the console's history. Despite the strong sales, the motion controls sucked.
You ever wonder what the bottom of an Avatar shoe looks like? Well, bam! There it is.
Like the Wii, basic motions were okay, but trying anything that required precision wouldn't work. This was a device that appealed just to the casual audience. Almost immediately, the core audience rejected Kinect. And looking at the marketing and lineup of games, it's easy to see why. Xbox would desperately try to make games that appeal to the core audience, but the device just wasn't capable of doing anything that required precision, and sometimes it just had a mind of its own.
Want to feel old real quick? This kid's probably 20 now. He can probably go to a bar, get a drink, if he's like 21, 22.
Just wasn't capable of doing anything that required precision, and sometimes it just had a mind of its own.
Sup?
In some cases, navigating menus was a complete nightmare.
Enter the world. Race for the best time on each course. Team up in a real...
Also, a number of great studios were put to work to make Kinect exclusives, so again, the first party lineup would be less appealing. Rare were now making Wii Sport ripoffs and adventure party games for Kinect, while Lionhead, the developers of the Fable games, made a first-person on-rails action RPG that had...
Does this sound familiar? I just want to bring this up because this is an example of a big company that has a platform getting super committed to a niche in the gaming industry that basically nobody asked for. So they had some of their best studios pour money and time, years of time, and it ended up being a total waste. Does that sound familiar? Because it's basically what Jim Ryan did over at PlayStation with all this live service stuff, where he has Naughty Dog work on a multiplayer game, not a Kinect game, but a multiplayer live service money-making game. And they worked on that for like 5 years because they started it in like 2019, and they ended up just totally canning it. I mean, they didn't even bother releasing it. Now it looks like we're going to get Concord. Doesn't look like they're going to delay it. It looks like we're actually going to get that here in a couple weeks. I think it's like 12, 13 days away. And I don't think that's going to make any money. They will likely waste, when all is said and done, about $250 million on Concord. Just let that sink in. Or Rocksteady. Exactly. Abhinav, like Warner Brothers having Rocksteady, the former kings of single-player open-world games that won ridiculous numbers of Game of the Year awards from so many outlets with Arkham City and even Arkham Knight. And then they went off, and in this case, it doesn't seem like Warner Brothers pushed them. It seems like the guys that owned Rocksteady, Jamie Walker and Sefton Hill, did it. But they chased the live service trend as well, wasted years and years and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars for nothing. This is what they mean when they say like history repeats itself, except normally they're talking about like wars and when people die because stakes are really high. In this case, we're just talking about like stupid little video games. But the same principle applies. These companies and groups and people and just people will make the same mistakes over and over and over again because they don't really understand the history of what they're doing. If Jim Ryan were more in tune with the gaming industry, I think he would have known that this was going to be a total waste of time and money, but he was blinded at the potential of live service money. So this is what we got. But it's just very interesting to hear a lot of the mistakes that were made back here mirror some of the mistakes being made by companies today. Now, I think PlayStation is far enough ahead that it won't really affect them, all this live service stuff. But I mean, you're starting to see PS5 console sales are dropping pretty heavily right now. There's just a report that came out earlier today / yesterday about it. So I think people are getting really frustrated at the lack of first-party single-player games coming out. And there might be repercussions for that in the next year or two, you know, when the dust settles. But I think it's important to just bear that in mind, that these mistakes, both sides have made them. Nobody's immune. And a lot of them started here.
Rare were now making Wii Sport ripoffs and adventure party games for Kinect, while Lionhead, the developers of the Fable games, made a first-person on-rails action RPG that had a fairly mixed reception at best, and unfortunately, this will be the company's last release before closing their doors in 2016. Xbox didn't learn from the mistakes of the Wii, as, like the Wii, the hype soon died off. Motion controls were just another fad, but this one had lasted for the entire generation, and unfortunately for Don Mattrick, Xbox had arrived to the party 5 years too late. The PlayStation 3, on the other hand, focused on making great games. They improved the online experience and added a new subscription service, and the first-party offering were Game of the Year contenders. Xbox put out a documentary series called Power On detailing the rise of Xbox, and episode 4 is entirely devoted to Halo and its sequel. They are very upfront here that without Halo, Xbox wouldn't exist.
Microsoft had that platform-defining title that you had to go out and buy an Xbox if you wanted to play.
Without Halo, you know, we're not here.
Halo Combat Evolved.
Isn't that amazing? One franchise. If they didn't have that one franchise, Microsoft would have dumped Xbox and just moved on. They're like, it was fun. Imagine how different the gaming world would be if there was no Xbox. If it was just PlayStation and Nintendo. Crazy. I don't think it'd be good. I think their competition is crucial. It's why even if you're a PlayStation fan, I think you should be rooting for Xbox to get some good Game of the Year contenders. Because that I just choked on my own throat. That will force them to stop screwing around with all of these live service games. Because again, the live service thing is because they just assumed that they could do the live service stuff and still go on and make the same games that they were making before. And that just ended up being false because Naughty Dog ended up wasting years and years and years, and you know, everybody's wasted time. So I just find it so fascinating that they're so transparent. Yeah, if we didn't have Halo, Xbox probably dead.
Which makes it all the more disappointing when you look at the shovelware and broken promises because of Kinect. The first Xbox didn't sell anywhere near the same amount as the PlayStation 2, but a game as good as Halo is a reason to buy the console. But in the 360 era, Don Mattrick wanted you to buy an Xbox because of Kinect. The brand lost sight of what made the Xbox 360 worth buying in favour of trend chasing, and over time this put Sony back in the game. By the end of the generation, the PlayStation 3 overtook the 360, and Xbox would once again end up finishing in third place.
Talk about a lost lead. You know, there's an old saying, it applies to content creation, YouTubing, making a business. It applies to pretty much everything. But it's, you know, when you are trying to ride waves, you shouldn't be surprised when you don't make any yourself. And I think that follows and holds true here. In the case of the Wii, they made their own wave and they rode it to the most successful console of the generation. PlayStation, they figured, you know what, we're going to focus on good games. And they made those good games and those carried it across the finish line. Xbox, though, was trying so desperately to catch the same waves that the Wii was riding to success that they just fell behind. Because it doesn't matter if you catch the same wave a little bit, because the guy that actually made the wave and was able to start following it from the beginning will always be ahead of you.
For many Xbox fans, the Xbox One and its abysmal reveal will forever be Don Mattrick's legacy. If you've ever wondered why the third Xbox console had a very confusing name, it's because this console was meant to be an all-in-one entertainment hub, which included games, movies, TV, and live sports. Which means the whole reveal event could basically be summarized with
TV, 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 sports TV, TV, TV.
In the final episode of Power On, this episode about the Xbox One is quite eye-opening, not very surprising, and a little bit depressing.
And again, this is the problem with like making big corporate decisions based on surveys and data. You know, I think a lot of companies get caught up in spreadsheets. You know, they look at the spreadsheets and then they look at which column has the most numbers next to it. Okay, well, this here, and then we look at this row and there's these numbers, so that's what we're doing. And I think the Xbox One is a perfect example because they looked at it and they said, well, gamers, there's, I don't know what the numbers would have been back in 2013, but if we say there's like 100 million gamers, okay, and if we look at this column, we can see that there's actually 300 million people that watch TV and use cable boxes. So we shouldn't target gamers if we want to sell a lot of these. We should target the cable box customers because there's a lot more of them. I'm brilliant. And that's why they decided to do the Xbox One, because they really thought that if they targeted that way, it was going to be way more successful, when they just totally forgot that, no, cable box people really don't care if their cable box can also play games. So they're not going to spend $300 on a console that also plays games and is a cable box. They're just going to get the cable box from Comcast or DirecTV or whoever. And gamers are going to be frustrated because they're getting a console that is worse than the competition's console because everybody else is so focused on TV. You know, it's kind of silly. Like, and now looking back 10 years later and seeing how the world has changed and moved away from cable and cable boxes, it makes it all the more hilarious that they thought that was the future. You know, it's just really, really funny. Yeah. And it was more expensive and it was less powerful. Yeah. Just across the board, it was way worse in every way.
As each person would get off stage, you know, the execs in the room would ask what the pulse is on social, and it was not good.
This is not going well. This is not going well at all.
To his credit, Don Mattrick was interviewed for the series and gave insight into why Xbox took this approach with this console, as he mentioned that more people use the Xbox 360 to watch TV than play games, which would explain the sudden obsession with TV and movies.
It just announced that for the first time, people are using the Xbox more for entertainment, TV, movies, and music, than for playing video games.
It was exciting to think about what a single-purpose, dedicated entertainment console could be.
But this is terrible logic. I bought an Xbox 360 because it had Halo 3 and Grand Theft Auto 4, not because I could watch Netflix. It's like buying an iPhone because it has the best calculator app.
Yeah, I mean, I would even flip it and be like, you know, iPhone has YouTube on it. You got videos on it. I spend a lot more time, honestly, on my phone playing videos, probably per hour, than I spend on the phone or texting people or interacting with people the way a phone can, or taking pictures and stuff. But if they release the next iPhone and it didn't have cameras, because they're like, well, people spend way more time watching videos, so we made it better at watching videos. You'd be like, well, but now I'm not going to buy it because I bought it for these features. And I happen to also use it a lot for this thing, but that's kind of like a secondary purpose. It's a secondary concern for me. And again, it's amazing that a company with so many very highly paid executives could make these basic leaps in logic and these basic mistakes. It's really, really surprising. But this is what happens when I think the executives are isolated from their fan base and from the community. It's why I think it's so good when executives come from the fan base, where you have people who head up gaming companies who are gamers, where you have executives who are gamers, because they at least understand roughly what's going on. And eventually they'll grow disconnected and out of touch. I think that happens a lot with these companies, where it's like I've said before, $70 for a normal human being in the US or all around the world, $70 is a lot of money. I know we can be like, oh, but like with inflation, it's equivalent to $60 from 2019, which is true. But it doesn't change that it's a lot of money. And when you are releasing constant, updates and the live service stuff with that game and DLC, and you're basically expecting me to spend $100, $120, $150, whatever on your game, you shouldn't be surprised when people's standards rise, because that's just what's going to happen. So I think what happens is a lot of these executives, though, they get their big paychecks or their stock options and things, and they just get used to their quality of life. And for them, $70 is not that big of a deal. If anything, for them, that's like an impulse buy. I heard, I forget what streamer it was, but I remember, I don't know why I remember this, but this streamer was being talked to by somebody about finances and their money and stuff. And the streamer was asked, like, what is your no big deal price tag? In other words, like, what amount of money can you spend impulsively when you go out with your friends or you go to the mall or something without having to worry about it? This is the kind of thing where it's like you pay $1 for a donut and you're not going to really think about it after that. What is that price point for each person? And this streamer said pretty much anything in the 4 digit range, I don't stress about. 5 digits, I might have to think about it a little, but yeah. And then 6 digits, yeah, I have to be very intentional spending that kind of money. I was like, oh God. So this person can impulsively spend like $9,000 and they're not going to stress about it. It's not that big of a deal. It's the equivalent of like deciding to buy like $1 candy bar or bag of Skittles or something. And I think that reveals how out of touch some of these people can get when they start making ridiculous amounts of money, because like we've all probably been there. I don't know how some of you guys are in your personal lives. But like I've been in a spot, especially during like college, where $5, it's a big moment. Like I no Starbucks coffee for me. I've been in the spot where like, I remember in college being so freaking hungry because my check from Best Buy was still like 2-3 days away, but I had to pay rent and I ran out of money because my car's brakes were going out. So like the bolts on the underside, like you have the bracket and then like the bolts that go through to screw into where it was like an old 1996 Volvo. And then the ceramic plate, my brakes had worn down through all of the ceramics. So it was just metal on the rotor. Just every time you'd brake, it was crunchy and would screech and scream. And I had to replace my brakes. So I had to do that. And when I did that, I was completely broke. And I remember being so hungry and being like, I can't even go get a bean burrito from Taco Bell for $1. Like I can't do that. I couldn't go and buy a pack of ramen for $1. And I remember it was very humbling because I had to go to my buddy I lived with, Caleb, and I had to ask him if I could have some of the bread that was on his like in the island that we had in our little apartment. And it was like very humbling to have to admit, like I'm literally starving. because I can't afford food for 2 days. Can you help me out? And he very generously was like, oh, hell yeah, dude. And he was making good money working in the oil fields. Like I've been there. Like thankfully I'm not there anymore, especially with 2 kids, but I've been there. And I think we've all been in a spot like that. Assuming you didn't grow up in like a very wealthy household, and it fundamentally changes your perspective. And I think for some of these people, they've either never been in that position because they grew up in a very fortunate position, or they did at one time experience that, but then they got so wealthy, they grew out of touch, and their impulse price rose to 5 digits or 6 figures or 7 figures for some of these people. You remember reading about the CEO of Bungie and how he had just casually spent over $2 million on collectible cars in the time since they were bought by Sony. Like his no big deal limit is probably in that 5 to 6 digit range. He can probably spend $100,000 on a car and he's not going to lose sleep over it. But for a normal human being, spending $70 on a game is like a big moment. You know, that's something you need to be very precise with. And it's not something that people will just impulsively do. A lot of people do get into a good financial position and it's not as big of a deal for them. Absolutely. But for a lot of people, not a negligible number of people, $70 is a lot of money and it should be treated as such. And I know I'm saying that from the position of somebody that now works as a YouTuber and I'm doing quite well for myself. But I want to just kind of reaffirm that, like, I remember, because it was not that many years ago, honestly. It was just a few short years ago where I was in that position. And I try very hard not to lose sight of that and get to the point where I'm like, like that one guy for the Suicide Squad game who was like, if you're upset about this game costing $70, you're just a brokey. You know, I don't want to ever be in that spot where I'm like, cry me a river. It's only $3,000. You know, I don't want to ever be like that. I do want to impulsively buy a lot of candles on discount because I do have a problem with collecting candles in the summer when they're on clearance. But that's a separate thing. That's a separate thing.
They're nice to have, but not the reason to buy the device. A better example would be the Nintendo Switch. The console doesn't even have a Disney Plus, HBO Max, or Amazon Prime app, but the sales far exceeded that of the Xbox One, as it had a great lineup of games and was much cheaper.
You remember the scandal when they announced the Switch and it didn't have a Netflix app or a YouTube app? People were like, what the hell? Add it now. And I don't even know if they ever did. But it's because Nintendo understood this is a gaming device. It's not a Netflix device. We don't want it to be the one-stop shop for all of your entertainment. If you want to watch a show, watch it on your phone. That can be the one-stop shop. But the Switch is a gaming device. That's what we're doing. Like, and I appreciate it. I think eventually they added some stuff, but they got Hulu and Twitch, but I think they removed them. Oh, really? Crunchyroll. Oh, who knew?
It's as if people were buying a games console to play video games. On top of that, Kinect was back.
You suck!
But by now, the hype for Kinect was well and truly dead. Even worse, you couldn't buy the console without Kinect included, whether you liked it or not. After the terrible reveal event for the Xbox One, they tried to course correct for E3 with a greater focus on games, but this came with the reveal that the console would be always online, wouldn't play used games, and would cost $500 at launch. And so...
Yeah, again, like every single bullet point they missed. Price point, they disappointed everybody. They missed that one. Pro consumer features like playing used games, which seems like a no-brainer, they missed that one. Like, they eventually figured out, hey guys, we don't want used games to be a thing because we don't get a cut of that. So instead, let's just make digital copies of games the norm. And then everybody will own their games digitally, and you can't trade digital games. You can do like family sharing. I know you can do that, but it's pretty limited. You can do that with like one person. You can't sell it to somebody permanently, you know? So they figured out this kind of roundabout way of achieving the same goal or same end at the end of the day. It took a number of years, but they eventually got there because now used copies of games are not really that common. But back during the Xbox One era, they just tried to brute force it. They tried to just be like, nope, no used games. Even if you have a used copy, a used disc, you cannot give it to your friend for them to play, which is just, again, the chutzpah to do that is shocking. I would just love to know what they were saying behind closed doors about that before they decided to do it. Because we get amazed with some of the decisions from some of these big corporate bigwigs where you're like, you knew that was not going to be received well. Like the Mrs. Freeze thing with Suicide Squad. Like you knew that wasn't going to go over well with your fan base and you did it anyways. I would still like to know what you were saying behind closed doors, if you acknowledged it was going to be received poorly or if you were just so delusional you thought everybody would love it. But with this, there is no question. They knew that was going to go over very, very poorly and they didn't care. Because again, I think that they thought they were invincible. They thought they could just get away with it because they had done pretty well in the 360 era. And they didn't think Xbox gamers would leave for PlayStation. And they were wrong. They were quite wrong. Zer989, thank you for resubbing the Prime, my friend, over on Twitch. Thank you, my friend.
Sony were very quick to pounce on this.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Dude, this was legendary.
Thanks.
I'm very proud to announce that PlayStation 4 will be
Savage, dude. It's amazing that they had to do that. I think the video was 7 seconds long or something like that. And it's just sharing PlayStation games. That's the whole thing. It's amazing. It's just amazing. But yeah, that's how they did it. And it crushed Xbox. Because it really did a great job of showing just how ridiculous the policy was that you couldn't play used games on Xbox One.
Thanks.
I'm very proud to announce that PlayStation 4 will be available at $399.
Before the consoles had even launched, Sony had practically won this generation due to this price tag. The always online requirements were a sore spot for many, but Don Mattrick didn't care.
Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Yeah, that one, I think it was in a written interview. I don't know if he'll bring it up. There was specifically a question asked of Don Mattrick or one of his associates, specifically saying, hey, servicemen and women overseas, so people that are in the armed services and like armed forces, in like the army, for example, deployed to Germany, let's say, or Afghanistan, they don't have consistent online connectivity. But one of the things they like to do when they get back to their barracks is they like to play games together, like Madden or Call of Duty or something. How are they going to play on an Xbox One to play the newest games? And he countered with this very same answer where he said, well, you know, it's not really for those types of situations. We have a product for that, the Xbox 360. So he literally was like, yeah, even if you're serving our country overseas, Crimea River. Like, it's unbelievable. Again, how they thought that was an adequate answer is just shocking.
The previous generation, the Xbox 360 was easy to develop for and cheaper than the PlayStation 3, while the Xbox One was harder to develop for and more expensive than the PlayStation 4. In late 2013, the Xbox One launched in third place, and it stayed there. For Xbox, it's been that way for the last 10 years.
Zynga has announced that Don Mattrick has joined its ranks as Chief Executive Officer.
Less than 1 month after the abysmal E3 press conference, Don Mattrick left Xbox to join mobile game developer Zynga, where he would last a full 2 years before resigning from that role.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure he got some good stock options. If he held on to them, I'm sure he's swimming in it now. But it makes you wonder, like, okay, like, did he? I mean, surely he knew he was leaving. You don't just move jobs like that within a month impulsively. So at the time of the press conference, he knew he was on his way out. But it makes you wonder if that had any like influence on his decisions as the head of Xbox, you know?
Don Mattrick wasn't even at Xbox to see the Xbox One's launch, as Phil Spencer would be his successor. Xbox One had a pretty decent lineup for the console's launch, but it did include one of the worst launch titles in history that just so happened to be a Kinect game. Big surprise there. While Kinect was
The game's rated 2.7. Pros. Punching works. For a fighting game, that's kind of amazing. Like, what's something good you can say about the game? The most basic action for a fighting game. A punch works. You can punch stuff. Wow, that's pretty good. That's a pro. Cons. Bad menu navigation, disjointed gameplay, laughable story, terrible AI. All the goodies. Dude, that's crazy. Oh, man.
Was included with every Xbox One at launch. By May of the following year, Kinect was dropped, which brought the price of the Xbox One down to $400. But
yeah, and just bear that in mind. Like the $500 price tag versus $400 for the PlayStation 4 was a huge deal. I mean, you're literally priced 25% higher. So immediately turn off for people. And with all of these things, whenever there's competition, if there's ever a speed bump on the road leading you to the destination you want people to get to, in this case, buying the console, that is going to cause some people to just give up, like, and just be like, it's not worth it. And it's the same thing with live service games. It's the same thing with any product, really, but also consoles as well. Because we've talked about this with like live service games where you have stuff like a $70 price tag, and then you have things like poor matchmaking times, and then you have things like limited character rosters and stuff. And each of one of these could be a speed bump that prevents people from getting on board. But for the Xbox One, it had the easiest solution to this problem ever, which was to just remove the Kinect out of the box. So if you still wanted it, you could buy it separately, just as an add-on, and then sell the console for $400. But they refused to do that because, again, they thought they were invincible and that they could just force their way through. And that's ridiculous. Again, in hindsight, it seems so ridiculous. But for them, they really thought they could get away with it.
this was too little, too late. Phil Spencer has said the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 era was the most costly generation to lose. As digital distribution became more popular with the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, gamers now have a library that they've slowly built up over the course of several years. So persuading consumers to jump ship from one console to another is even more difficult now than ever before.
Very, very true. It's one of the unintended side effects of pushing the digital library thing, is that people get all in with their platform of choice because that's where they own all of their games, and they aren't that keen to leave for another platform because they're losing out on all those games. The only time you really have a chance to do that would be with something like, you know, the next generational update, because then, oh, well, I'm going to start fresh on that other console. That could sort of do it. But yeah, losing out on that generation was big oopsie. And it really prevents people from moving during the generation, just because, like, why would you? If you bought 20 games on your PS3 and then Xbox has a solid game that you're like, ooh, I'd like to play that, but then you consider moving over, like, you can't sell your library. That's how people used to do it. If you bought a Xbox 360 and then you got so pissed off at the Red Ring of Death stuff, you could just sell all of your Xbox games and sell your Xbox, usually to GameStop or just on Craigslist or something, or to a friend. And then you spend all that money getting into the new console and getting new games. Wasn't that big of a deal. But nowadays with digital libraries, you just can't do that.
It would explain why the following Xbox console would have a cheaper version with no disk drive to reduce the barrier to entry for Xbox.
I think that this is an example of overcorrection, and I've talked a lot about it. We've gotten flack for it. Specifically, people on TikTok get weirdly triggered about Series S versus Series X and discussions of the Series S being what's holding back the generation with cross-platform games. But I think that this was an overcorrection because they were so insistent on not making the same mistakes of the last generation that they're like, okay, we will not be beat on price, because that was a big problem with the Xbox One. So we're going to create a console that releases significantly below everybody else. So the Series X was at like 500, and then the Series S came in at like 300 at launch. I get why they did it, but again, when we talk about other side effects that weren't really intended, the side effect of the Series S being required as a matter of compatibility with all games that can also be played on the Series X is that now any multi-platform game has to also run on this. And that's a problem because this is significantly weaker than the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. And in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of people way, 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 way smarter than me, is that the Series S, being as weak as it is, has basically held back multi-platform games compared to where they would be otherwise. I don't even think that's a controversial thing to say because it's so clearly evident, but some people still really freak out when you bring it up. So I think that this was an overcorrection. I think they could have done something like a Series X and then a Series X without a disk drive. Call it good. Don't bother with a second SKU entirely, or a totally separate product rather. Don't even bother with that. Just a Series X at 500 and then no disk drive at 400, because you're going to make that money up with digital sales anyways. And I think that would have achieved it. Basically exactly what the PlayStation 5 did. I just think this was a little too much because they were just so insistent on not being beat on price.
This shouldn't excuse the more recent mistakes Xbox has made. The weaker first and third party lineup has been an issue since the Xbox One days, and the disappointing releases of Starfield and Redfall have done very little to persuade consumers to jump ship. More recently, there have been layoffs, weak console sales, and now studio closures. You can absolutely not blame Don Mattrick for this, but it feels like Xbox has been trying to play catch up ever since the Xbox One's reveal. The failure of the Xbox One and Kinect had a very negative effect on the Xbox brand, especially when Xbox went from the highs of the 360 to the lows of the Xbox One. I've seen a few posts and comments fantasizing about how different things would be if Phil Spencer had taken over instead of Don Mattrick, if the Xbox never shifted its focus to Kinect, and the Xbox One reveal wasn't a complete disaster, as even a decade later, some of the effects can be felt to this day.
It's a really fair point. Again, shout out to Onwards and Upwards. Go give them a sub. Go like the video. It's phenomenal. They did a great job with it. I think that the long-lasting legacy, I suppose, for Don Mattrick is just one of bedevilment. People just being baffled at the decisions that were made, and they're still trying to dig themselves out of it, frankly. They're really, really trying, and I think now they're focused so heavily on games that will help. I think they'll get probably a good amount of momentum headed into the next generation as they get a lot of these big games releasing, as long as the quality level is up there. Their biggest problem is that Xbox has still struggled to maintain consistent quality. And so long as they struggle with that, I'm not sure they're going to find a whole lot of success with like expanding Game Pass and winning over PlayStation players. Once they can regularly drop stuff and you can kind of rest assured that they're going to release it and it's going to be an 8 out of 10, then I think people can be more inclined to jump into it. But as of right now with Xbox stuff, you don't know if their first party title is going to be a 9 out of 10 or if it's going to be a 6 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10, like a Redfall or something. And that's the biggest problem. They've got to get consistent quality down. Once they do that, they'll be much more competitive. But as of right now, it's just, there's no reason to really give them the benefit of the doubt. But they're working on it, and hopefully they figure it out, because they need to. And again, it's like I said, if you're a PlayStation fan and gamer, and you might even hate like the Xbox, that's whatever, it's fine. I think it's stupid to like do the console war thing, but whatever. But you should still be rooting for competition, because the only way that PlayStation really pushes it is when they feel like they need to. The only time when PlayStation really knocks it out of the park is when they feel pressure coming from behind. That sounds really sexual. I'm sorry. What I mean is like they have wind coming from behind, pushing them forward from the competition. That sounded... Anyway, they do their best when they are under siege and they feel like they have to really compete. When they are just gliding gently down the river, gliding off of their past successes, they are going to eventually rest on their laurels. And that's what they, I would argue, have done this generation, where they've just been resting on their laurels and asking everybody else to make live service games. And I think the quality has reflected it. So, fantastic video. Let's all just be glad that Don Mattrick is no longer one of the heads of these companies, because he didn't have a great track record, I'll tell you what. Sure didn't. He took my thing.